Honored to be joined this morning by Congressman Dean Phillips. He is not only a member of the United States Congress, but also a candidate for president and also relevant to current news, ranking member of the Middle East Subcommittee on House Foreign Affairs. Great to have you, Congressman.
Great to be with you, Krystal.
All right, so you got a little bit of good news for your campaign recently. Let's put this poll up on the screen in New Hampshire. Now, there's a strange situation unfolding in New Hampshire. Biden won't actually be on the ballot. So they, for once, asked a question that is useful in the state of New Hampshire, which is, okay, if Biden's not there and you got to write him in, who are you going to vote for? And you got Biden still leading at 27%, but you're in second there, 15%, Marianne Williamson at 10%, and then you've got someone else undefined at 5% and undecided at 44%. So just tell us, Congressman, a little bit about why you decided to run and what you think your path to victory is.
Well, Krystal, those are the numbers that don't lie. Politicians and spinsters and politicos love to mislead and misdirect. And the fact is 73% of New Hampshire Democratic voters want somebody different than the president. And I'm not here to condemn him. I respect him. He was the only one, I think, that could have beaten Donald Trump in 2020. And sadly, he's probably the only moderate Democrat in the entire country who is probably going to lose to him in 2024 unless we course correct. So my campaign and I were hoping to be at 15% in about 6 weeks. It took 2, and I think this is just a microcosm of how the entire country is feeling. And the best thing about this campaign is getting out and listening to people. Having been in Congress for 5 years now, I understand how quickly people in Washington completely lose touch with reality, keep fighting one another instead of fighting for Americans all over the place. And we have a crisis at home, abroad. It's time for change, and I think those numbers reflect exactly where people are at.
Congressman, I wonder if you can help solve a mystery for me, because we've all seen the polls of overwhelming majority of Democrats who say they want other choices than Biden. Many people, oftentimes the majority, saying they actually wish Biden would step aside. These are Democratic voters. And yet when you offer them actual choices, they mostly are still sticking with Joe Biden. So why do you think that that is?
Well, right now, there aren't many choices. And I think part of, the beautiful part of campaigning, the greatest part of democracy is that when you afford voters choices, introduce yourself, answer their questions, stand in front of them, take the heat, take the criticism, listen to their ideas. It's amazing what can happen. Some of the greatest successes in political history started exactly, in fact, lower than where I am right now, far lower. And that's true of our recent political history. So when people are introduced to options, and by the way, Krystal, I've been calling on other Democrats to enter the primary because that's how we do things in America. There are only 4 people right now, in my estimation, that will make it easier for Donald Trump to return to the White House. That's Cornel West, that's Jill Stein, that's Joe Manchin if he runs as an independent, and that's President Biden. Those are the only ones that literally are making it easier for Donald Trump. I wish more would enter. If American voters have choices, they will choose the best candidate positioned to win, and I intend that to be me. Someone had to do it, and now I'm in it to win it, and I'll make that case by listening, and I can't wait to get on the road.
Congressman, you recently apologized to Bernie Sanders for doubting what he had said about the DNC rigging the primary process. What have you seen?
Well, first of all, Krystal, I've been on the campaign trail now for just under 3 weeks, and I'm 54 years old, and I can tell everybody listening that it's never too late to learn and to understand something you may not have seen or use a new lens to view the world. And one of them is, I used to think Bernie Sanders was a sore loser when he was saying the system was rigged, that the Democratic National Committee used coronations and not competitions. And I'll tell you, after 3 weeks, Krystal, I can say that he's right. And my apology was literal to him and to all the people that supported Bernie, all the people that have known for some time that this duopoly, this political industrial complex, is actually making democracy harder to execute. They're suppressing voters, they're suppressing candidates, and they're suppressing debate, the 3 legs of the Democratic stool with a small d. And I mean it. When I say that I'm sorry, Bernie, I mean it, because he was right. And I'm on a mission to expose the truth, to shine light on the corruption, and the fact that I think both major parties right now are a significant part of the problem and why we're in this terrible crisis.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about majority opinion and consensus in democracy when it comes to Israel. Let's put this new poll up on the screen from Reuters. Just came out yesterday, I believe, found that 68% of all respondents support a ceasefire. That includes 3/4 of Democrats. Congressman, as I'm sure you know at this point, you've had 1 in every 200 Palestinians in Gaza who have been killed. You've had more than 4,000 children killed in this conflict. I'm wondering if you will join 31 of your colleagues in Congress and the overwhelming majority of Americans, especially Democrats, today and call for a ceasefire.
So, Krystal, let me start. I'll build a very fast arc for you and get to the question you're asking. First, which is the generational change that we need. This is an example of what happens when people doing the same things in the same way for 50 years, and I include President Biden in this, have generated the results that we see right now. War in Eastern Europe, horrifying bloodshed in the Middle East. I'm 54. I've been witnessing this my entire life. The cycle of violence, the cycle of misery, the loss of life, and it's enough. And I believe in Israel's right to exist. And I also believe in Palestinian self-determination and their need of a country. And I intend to be the first Jewish president in American history and be the one that signs documents that finally establishes a Palestinian state, because I've had enough. Hamas is not Palestinians, and Benjamin Netanyahu is not Israelis. And I believe if you surveyed both populations right now, they would say the same thing. So what do I want to see? I want to see every single one of those hostages released, including apparently 9 Americans, which I believe should be the foremost priority of both the American president and anybody in elected office here in the United States. Release the prisoners, release the hostages. Then, yes, there should be a ceasefire. And then most importantly, Israel should not be taking on Hamas alone. I think this is a time for like-minded nations of the world, including the Arab states and Gulf nations, to unify in eliminating Hamas, ensuring that there are free and fair elections in both the West Bank and Gaza, so that Palestinians can choose, and I pray that they do, choose peace. A new generation of leadership. Abu Mazen is in his 80s. The Palestinian Authority is corrupt. Hamas is the enemy of both Israel and Palestinians. It's time for change. It's time for new leadership. Same is true in Israel. I think Benjamin Netanyahu's right-wing government is culpable. I think the settlement policy is abhorrent. And the only way that Israel will be safe and secure, the only way that Palestinians will have a homeland of their own with security and opportunity, and the only way that America can come back together is if we solve this issue. So my call to action is just that. Release the hostages, end the hostilities, have a multinational peacekeeping force that creates peace in Gaza so that there can be an election and we can create change immediately. Hamas has to be eliminated, and I believe it's time for Benjamin Netanyahu to be taken out of office by Israelis in a democratic nation and end this nonsense. It is time, it is long overdue, and the same people in the same roles are not going to get it done. I cannot stand to watch this bloodshed any longer, period.
So, Congressman, just to clarify your position, let's put this next element up on the screen. There's a new letter from some of your colleagues in the House, again, reiterating the call for a ceasefire precisely because of the numbers that you see up here on the screen, which is the monthly average of child casualties in conflicts. You can see in Gaza, and these numbers are a little bit outdated, frankly, at this point, over 4,000 children killed in this conflict. This dwarfs, I mean, it doesn't even come close to any other modern conflict that we see. Will you sign on to that letter calling for a ceasefire because of the violation of rights of children?
Krystal, I just made my point really clear. I will call for a ceasefire the minute every one of those hostages is released, period.
And are you aware, Congressman, let me just
finish though, Krystal. You asked me the question and I will totally answer it. There should not be a ceasefire until the hostages are released. At that very moment, absolutely. And then there should be a multinational peacekeeping force that ensures that this ends immediately. You know, there was a ceasefire until October 7th. This cycle has got to stop.
If you ask Palestinians in the West Bank, they may have a different story about who exactly broke the ceasefire. But I do want to press you on the piece with the hostages, because obviously hostages are very much put at risk by the indiscriminate bombing campaign that is being waged by Israel. And I'm sure you're aware of the reporting that said there was a hostage deal that was very close to coming to fruition, which was undercut and ultimately killed, and now they're trying to renegotiate it by the ground invasion by the IDF. So it seems to me that, you know, there have been actions taken on the Israeli side that have prevented the release of the hostages. And also it's worth mentioning as well, they're holding hundreds of women and children on the Israeli side, Palestinian women and children on the Israeli side as well.
Any hostages should be released. Any civilians have got to be let go. I don't care who's holding them. I believe the American president has a clear and distinct mandate to ensure particularly the Americans are released. And Krystal, I think we're saying the same thing. These hostilities have to end, and they should end the minute Hamas releases the prisoners. This is not that difficult. So I don't understand why this is so complicated for people to understand. And I believe, by the way, I want to see pro-Palestinian and pro-Israeli protesters here in America unite behind humanity. That's whose side I'm on. I love Israel and I love Palestinians. And I believe this is sickening and disgusting. I cannot wait until this occurs because I can't watch the videos that I've been seeing of babies being slaughtered. I cannot stand, blood is red no matter whose it is. And I'm sickened, I'm disgusted, and most of all, I'm disappointed beyond belief of a generation of leaders, old generation, many of them in their 80s now, who have not solved this problem in decades. I'm a Jewish man. I love Israel. I love my Palestinian brothers and sisters. I care about humanity. I care about children. And the only way we can end this nonsense is to release the hostages and have the world unite to ensure that Gaza is safe for everybody inside of it. And by the way, Hamas wanted the overreaction that they got. That's why I'm so disappointed right now. Terrorists want an overreaction to change the game, and they changed it, but not in the way that the world needs. The only good thing now is that we have a chance, maybe the final chance, to prevent more tragedy in the Middle East, but also, Krystal, to speak on behalf of both the Jewish and Muslim community in the United States right now that are also at great and grave risk. I'm representing them because we're Americans here right now, and the only way we overcome this is exactly what you just said. I would just say release the hostages, have a ceasefire, have a peacekeeping force, have an election, and then the entire world must unite. By the way, the Chinese, the Russians, the Gulf states, the Arab nations have got to participate in this. And then when it happens, I believe we all have an obligation to ensure two things: that Israel is perpetually safe and secure, and that Palestinians have the infrastructure, the education system, and the resources necessary to build an economy and provide safety and security themselves. There will be Jews living in Palestine, and there will be Palestinians living in Israel as they do right now. By the way, the Palestinians living in Israel have more rights than any single Muslim in the entire Middle East has in most cases. So the
but they
truth
still
is
have
usually
fewer
in the middle.
rights.
It is in this
But
case.
they still have
What's
fewer
that?
rights than Jewish Israelis.
In some
however,
cases, Krystal, like
Congressman,
I just said, but Krystal, let me just repeat this. Two things can be true at once. The fact of the matter is Israel affords more rights to its Muslim population, Muslim Israelis, than any nation in the Middle East affords to their own. That is true. People need to know that. Israel is a progressive nation. Benjamin Netanyahu is not Israel.
Israel is keeping millions, before this war, millions of Palestinians in Gaza under a brutal blockade. They are keeping the Palestinians in the West Bank under a brutal occupation. They have assigned second-class citizenship to the Arab Israelis who, are Israeli citizens. So to call that a progressive state, I have to depart from your analysis there. But I want to ask you a separate question, which is, you described Putin's war on Ukraine as. But Congressman, let me ask you this question: do you believe that Israel right now is committing war crimes?
I don't have any. First of all, I don't have any evidence because I'm not a war crime specialist. I'm not an attorney in that respect. What I see is horrifying. There's no question that people are dying in an indiscriminate way. There is no question whatsoever. And by the way, and let me answer your question because it's a really important one. Every nation in the world should abide by the laws of the world as it relates to committing war. And the atrocities being committed in the Middle East, the atrocities being committed by Russia, by nations in Africa, by so many in the world. This is a bigger issue, Krystal. It's not just there.
Well, I actually want to ask you about that. I actually want to ask you about that because you did describe Putin's war on Ukraine as genocide. You accused him of committing war crimes, and that came specifically after hearing testimony that involved his indiscriminate attacks on civilian infrastructure. And so far, and we have a graphic to this regard, Israel has damaged or destroyed roughly 45% of all housing in Gaza, 117 press headquarters, 68 mosques, 3 churches, 221 schools, and 115 health facilities. So you were able to identify that as war crimes when it pertained to Russia. Why the reluctance here?
It's not reluctance. I'm telling you right now, I'm saying it once again. What I'm seeing happen in Gaza, I believe is both destructive to Palestinians, and I think is going to be equally destructive to Israel and Israelis if this doesn't end expeditiously and immediately, and that should happen the minute all the hostages are released. If you're Hamas and you won't release the 200 hostages in return for creating a safe environment for every citizen you ostensibly represent, we got bigger problems. I agree with what you just said, Krystal. It's abhorrent. It is worse for Israel's future by conducting the war in this fashion. There's no question. Eliminating Hamas is distinct from eliminating human beings in an indiscretionary manner. I agree. I'm trying to express my heartfelt truth that I am appalled. And I'm deeply appalled because I think this is going to hurt Israel more in the long term if this continues. That's why I want the hostages released. My job, Krystal, as a United States congressman, is to first and foremost look out for Americans. We have Americans being held hostage by a terrorist organization in Gaza that must release them, At that very moment, I will be the first to call for a ceasefire, an international peacekeeping force, including Arab nations, to protect Gaza, to ensure we have free and fair elections as expeditiously as possible in both the West Bank and in Gaza. The Palestinian Authority is corrupt. Hamas is a terrorist organization. And it's also time for Benjamin Netanyahu's government to go and let Israelis choose peace. I demand that, period, and paragraph. And I think that's going further than many of my colleagues right now. And believe me, having traveled to Jerusalem twice this year, being in Riyadh and Turkey, trying so hard to push peace in the Middle East, I will not rest now. And by the way, the reason I'm running for president is it is time for a new generation to end this nonsense, end the wars, invest in peace, invest in diplomacy. And it's not going to happen with a bunch of 80-year-olds who've been doing this for 50 years, whether that is in the West Bank or in the West Wing, period.
And again, Congressman, I'll just reiterate that there was a hostage deal on the table to free many of the hostages, which was undercut on the Israeli side.
I'm not saying many of them, Krystal. I'm saying all of them, all of the hostages. And by the way, if there are
and how many children would need to be slaughtered before it's time to call for a ceasefire?
Krystal, come on now. I'm saying that women and children held hostage by either side right now must
and how does it help
hostilities
which I agree with. But how does it help hostages when you're bombing the very area that they're being held in?
Then Krystal, then release them.
That's putting hostages at risk, which is what the family members of the hostages themselves are saying in Israel.
Krystal, 9 Americans apparently are being held by Hamas in tunnels in Gaza. Release all the hostages, and then there must be a ceasefire. I'm amazed that anybody sees it differently. We have 9 Americans being held by a terrorist organization in Gaza. I'm an elected member of Congress. They must be released along with every single hostage. And if Israel is keeping hostages that are civilians as well, they must be released, period. And then there must be a ceasefire, and then there must be a peacekeeping force, and there must then be an election. And that is exactly how we should all be looking at this. I do not want to see one more baby slaughtered in Israel and one more baby slaughtered in Gaza, period. And by the way, I don't understand how you can take one side of humanity. If you are just pro-Palestinian right now and you have no empathy for Israelis, and if you're only pro-Israeli and you have no empathy for Palestinians, you are the problem.
Which I agree with you completely, right now, which is exactly why 80% of Democrats are calling for a ceasefire, because they want to see Palestinian lives valued as much as their Israeli brothers and sisters, which is, the consensus position not only among Democrats but among the American public. I do want to move on to some other issues here quickly, because I know you don't have a lot of time. So very quickly, let me have you lay out, what do you see as the most significant policy differences that you have with Joe Biden?
Well, let's start with this one right here, peace. Now, I'm sick and tired of a nation. I lost my father in the Vietnam War, Krystal. I was 6 months old, and he died a couple days after Americans landed on the moon. And I literally think about him looking up, seeing America at its very, very best, and then looking down and seeing America at its very, very worst. I've lived a life of some tragedy, and I've lived a life of great opportunity, and I've lived on both sides of the advantage. And when I think about the America that I know and love and that I think we can still become, it starts with peace. We have been a nation that I think have pursued the wrong paths. I think we have a military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned us against that is destroying us from the inside. I believe that we should now be a nation that invests much more heavily in diplomacy than we do in our military. By the way, we spend only 10% of our total military budget on diplomacy. And I tell you, this is not the 1930s. This is 2023, we are at a point now where nuclear weapons will soon be able to be placed in backpacks and brought into any city in the world, whether it be New York, Tel Aviv, Moscow, or Beijing. And if we don't stop this nonsense and generate new leadership, both here and all around the world, we are going to end human life around the globe. So I will be a president of peace, and I will be a president of prosperity. Too many Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. 64% live paycheck to paycheck. This is a huge difference between me and the president. 40% can't afford a $400 emergency repair. Almost 1/3 of total American wealth is held by the top 1%. We are not going to survive this. From the inside, we have to ensure prosperity, and to the outside, we must pursue peace. That is who I am. That is what I intend to do. And believe me, that is the biggest difference between this administration and mine. I will populate mine with conservatives, with liberals, with independents, with thinkers on both sides, because if you're going to solve problems, you cannot surround yourself only with people who see things the same way. I'm afraid President Biden has been bought into this style of leadership for 50 years. He had 8 years in the White House as a vice president. And look at these circumstances, both in Ukraine and the Middle East. That's a huge point of difference. I can go through some less important things, but equally different. Cannabis legalization. 80% of the country wants it. Ohio voters just asked to do it the other day, and they did so. The president does not favor it. It's absurd. Psilocybin research. 30,000 veterans have committed suicide since Iraq and Afghanistan. Another thing we should talk about. While we lost 3,000 lives there, 30,000 from suicide. Psilocybin could be a perfect example of a naturally occurring substance that helps people. But you know what? The pharma industry spends $300 million a year lobbying Congress to protect the status quo because they can't make money on cannabis or psilocybin. And you know what? I'm the only member of Congress, Krystal, who takes no PAC money, no lobbyist money, no member money, and doesn't have a leadership PAC. It's absurd, the corruption that we are allowing in Washington. That is a huge difference. I will not tolerate it any longer. I'm going to tell the difficult truths. And by the way, I'm just saying the quiet part out loud. The corruption is real. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I hope you'll come back and we can talk more about your economic plan, because I know that's a focus of your campaign. If you don't mind, I'd love to do just
a lot of propositions.
I'd love to do just a quick lightning round so people can get a sense of where you stand on a variety of issues. So in terms of the minimum wage, what do you think it should be set at?
It's $7.25 right now. It has to be at least 15. It's abhorrent that the United States of America, and it's abhorrent that this president hasn't ensured that has gotten done in the last 50 years.
And in terms of Social Security, would you keep it where it is? Would you cut benefits, or would you increase them?
If I got two propositions on that. Another example, for 50 years, leaders have had a chance to do something. They haven't done a thing. It's going to go bankrupt in 2033. Benefits will be cut by 25%. Two ways to fix it. Raise the cap from $160,000 to $250,000, because right now it's regressive. Someone making $160,000 a year, a family, is paying more of their income as a percentage than someone making $500,000 a year. It's wrong. It should be increased to $250,000. It'll extend the life of the program until about 2046. Secondly, no one's ever proposed the most simple solution. For the millions of Americans who have done well, who do not need their Social Security, I will create a pool that will then redistribute those who contribute to it to the lowest 10% of the socioeconomic recipients of Social Security, because inflation is killing people who rely on it entirely. And there are millions of Americans who would like to be philanthropic and share their success with those who need it. Not return it to the Treasury or to the government, but actually to the people. And that will boost, depending on how generous people are, it could boost the income of Social Security recipients magnificently. Those are two solutions that I will accomplish.
The PRO Act, which would establish further labor rights and hopefully expand the landscape for collective bargaining. Is that something you're in favor of and that you'll fight for as president?
Indeed, collective bargaining, unionization, I think have made the distinction in the United States. I voted for the PRO Act twice. The only part of it I don't like is secondary strikes, because that allows essentially strikes to occur against companies who are actually doing well by their employees. And as a family business that I ran for many, many years that shared a disproportionate amount of its success, one of the first profit-sharing programs in documented American history in the 1940s, believe me, nothing is more important than sharing with workers. And I am a pro-business and pro-worker Democrat. They're not mutually exclusive. They're mutually mandatory. And that is entirely my agenda, to ensure the working class, we raise the foundation with income, with benefits, with healthcare, with childcare, with pre-K education for children, and not just in cities and suburbs, but in rural America.
And lastly, Congressman, where can people find out more about your campaign?
Thanks for asking, because my team always says you don't say it too enough. Dean24.com. We are an insurgent campaign. We are on a mission to do better for this country. We are up against not just a system of corruption, but two political parties that are stifling debate, stifling participation. And my message to everybody is let's do better. It's time for change. It's time for a new generation. I am staffed by the most extraordinary team, I think, in American political history. Got Jeff Weaver, formerly Bernie Sanders campaign manager, on our team. Got Zach Grauman, who ran Andrew Yang's campaign in 2020. And of course, Steve Schmidt, who volunteered to help set this thing up because nobody was going to do it. He's now off on his own, supporting the effort, I think, in his own way. And I'll tell you, what he told me, this is a great way to wrap it up. I did his podcast about on October 11th. I was so furious that our Democratic Party in Washington was not saying the quiet part out loud. I was on his podcast. He called me the next day and said, Dean, in 2020, Joe Biden was the only person who could defeat Donald Trump. So we set up the Lincoln Project. The president called me right after the election and said, thank you. He only won by 40,000 votes in a handful of states. He called me and he said, in 2024, you are the only one that can defeat Donald Trump. And if you want to jump in, I'm going to help you get there. And that's where we're at. We are a team of rivals. We have progressives, moderates. I want to invite everybody. My slogan is everyone's invited. So I would invite you to visit Dean24.com, join the Dean team, help us organize, help us mobilize, because the Democratic Party is doing everything it can to prevent you from voting for me, to prevent other candidates from entering, and to prevent debate at a time we need it more than ever. The future's bright. We're going to get there, but we need people to help, and I would love nothing more.
Well, Congressman, I want to thank you both for the spirited debate today, but most importantly, I think the answer to a sort of ailing democracy is more democracy. I think it takes courage to throw your hat in the ring. I'm sure, the probably luncheons with your colleagues are a little frosty maybe at this point, or maybe privately they're celebrating what you're up to. I guess you can.
I'll tell you, you can imagine when you say the quiet part out loud, it's discomforting. And let me just extend a final invitation. Whether you are passionately pro-Israel or whether you're passionately pro-Palestine, please join us. I want to be that bridge. I want to demonstrate to the world how Americans do this. Even if we disagree sometimes, we've got to place humanity first. That means here, that means in Palestine, it means in Israel. Please, this is our one chance to change the course of world history. If we do it together, it will not happen with Donald Trump or Joe Biden. Mark my words.
Congressman, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Have a great day. Keep the faith.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.